James Gierach, abogado estadounidense, exfiscal de Cook County, durante los últimos 20 años ha luchado en contra de la prohibición de las drogas en Estados Unidos. Fue candidato para fiscal general de Cook County y para gobernador de Illinois. Es autor, conferencista y abogado. Ha discutido y debatido el tema de políticas de drogas en televisión, radio y diversas audiencias. Actualmente, forma parte del Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.
Good morning. I want to thank Mexico UNIDA for the opportunity to come here and speak to you folks. We've been treated great. It's been a great experience, and actually of the many drug policy conferences I've attended, I'm going to rank this one #1. So thank you. I'm going to change my script a little bit today. I'm a speaker with LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and this is a group of people who are opposed to drug use, who are opposed to the extent that we were former prosecutors, former police officers, former judges, people who are not in favor of using drugs, but who have come out uniformly saying that it's time to end the war on drugs because the war on drugs doesn't work. It puts more drugs of every kind everywhere. Now, I'm going to change a little bit from what I was going to talk about because of some of the comments that I just heard. We heard that drugs are controlled under this regime of Al Capone UN prohibition. And the reason it's controlled is because drugs are dangerous. Well, this wonderful controlled system just put 15 tons of methamphetamine in Mexico. The economic leg, which is the foundation for prohibition and the foundation for the success of the drug cartels. It is the money that's involved in the drug business that brought the 15 tons. I was a prosecutor in Chicago prosecuting drug and homicide cases in the early 1970s. At the time, the best heroin you could get in Chicago was 2% pure, and they used to call it Mexican tar. Now in Chicago, after 40 years of drug war, you can get 90% pure heroin. That's so strong the kids don't need to use needles. The high school in suburban Cook County where kids that I know go have a heroin problem. 2 miles from my home last summer, this wonderful UN prohibition paradigm program, the Al Capone paradigm, put 6,000 marijuana plants 2 miles from my home. How does that make our kids safer? Now he says the kids should have, the kids have said in Europe by 60%, whatever the percent was, that they're in favor of continuing prohibition. They don't want to legalize these substances. Well, we older folks, particularly those who had 22 years of experience in the United Nations that knows we've created a disaster worldwide, should give those kids a couple of pointers. They could take a pointer from the United States that in the most recent survey has shown that now 50% of the people in America, United States, are in favor of legalizing marijuana. Now, my friend here, who I just met this morning, and he is my friend, Antonio, says that we need to put in place religious values. The Taliban, who's opposed to drug use and so forth, even they suspended production in Afghanistan for a year or two because the United States was coming. In any event, there are other religious values other than just values about drugs. There are values about human life. There's values about morality. There's values about the problems of corruption and the need to avoid it. There's a need to teach the golden rule where people care about one another. But instead we have put in place a prohibition paradigm worldwide where we catch a kid in a controlled drug sale and the cop says to him, listen, I got you in 3 controlled sales. Unless you rat on the guy who gave you these drugs, you're going to prison forever. And then we incarcerate and put such harsh penalties in place that we build prisons in the United States, the land of the free, which has become the prison capital of the world. 2.3 million people behind bars. Prisons, the fastest growing housing in the United States during the 1990s. How does that make life better for the prisoners, for the families? these drugs, which are just inundating the world because of this wonderful policy. I don't want to miss any of his points. You know, as we debate whether we need to reform drug policy, I have to tell you, I ran for state's attorney in Cook County on the idea of drug policy reform to stop the crime and the violence and to reprioritize violent crime. So I'm standing in front of an audience, and one of the persons gets up and says, well, you know, why don't we do like they do in Saudi Arabia? Somebody sells drugs, buys drugs, uses drugs. Let's cut off their hand. And I said, geez, that's a good idea. The problem is what to do with all the hands. In the United States, over 50% of the people have used illicit substances. We have 2.3 million people behind bars now, and we can't pay the bills. If we put 150 billion behind prison because of their drug infractions, we really won't be able to pay our bills. We can't pay them as they are at the moment. Then we talked about the United Nations being in favor of health. Well, of course, the United Nations does do some things which are very good and helpful for children around the world in various programs. But its drug policy is not one of them. Is the United Nations in favor of insight, where people can come who are addicted to drugs and use the drugs safely under medical supervision? Is the United Nations in favor of heroin being supplied in a controlled, regulated environment in Canada and around the world? Of course it's not. The discussion about DUI, well, people under the influence of cannabis are twice as likely to have an automobile accident. Because you legalize drugs doesn't mean that you're supposed to drive a car when you're under the influence of alcohol or marijuana. And even the finding in the study he cited is very questionable, because many studies show that people who drive under the influence of marijuana slow down and are more careful. Not that I'm advocating use. And he makes the point, we've got synthetic marijuana, which is more dangerous. Well, why do we have synthetic marijuana? Because we've outlawed what's been around for the last 3 millenniums with prohibition. So now people are trying to figure out, well, how can I get that same effect, even though this is unlawful, and now we've got these dangerous things, which is true, they're selling. You know, I was a kid in the 7th grade, and we'd have square dance, and then we would go out that night and have a pizza, and the kids were sitting at the table talking, and they said, you know, you can get high if you put an aspirin in a Coke. So kids being what they are, we put the aspirin in the Coke, and it doesn't work, by the way. So don't try it. That's not, you know, he talks, let's talk about Bolivia. I had a friend who was an exchange student in Bolivia, Zumel, it's been too many years. Anyway, he's from Bolivia. And Bolivia, of course, is in the Andes, and it's very high. So in order to get through a day's work there, many people, historically and culturally, chew the coca leaf. So Bolivia goes to the United Nations and says, well, we've got these conventions, we'd like to comply, we're trying to be good neighbors, good partners in the treaties, but can we chew these leaves? Can we get an exception for the chewing of the coca leaf just so that we can go on with life? And the United Nations says, no. So finally Bolivia says, well, then we're going to withdraw. And now he says they want to get back in. Well, they want to get back in, but with an exception so that they can chew the coca leaf. And of course, the United Nations answer is no. Bolivia has set an example for Mexico, for the United States, for Guatemala, for Central America, for the Caribbean, for the Europeans, for the Asians, for the Australians, and for the world. Either we reform the drug policies of the United Nations, which set in place the prohibition foundation that is the hell of the world, or withdraw from the treaties. Life in this world for all people everywhere would be better without prohibition than with prohibition and the United Nations. If the United Nations will not solve these problems, then we need an organization that will. But Mexico, talking about solutions, can do something about that right now. Mexico can help become the tsunami of drug policy reform that hits the United States to the point and so powerfully that it can't sit there and continue this crazy war on drugs that's really destroyed America as much as it's destroyed any place. You know, he says terrorism. The terrorists are in favor of the war on drugs. It's the foundation and the support for terrorism, the money that comes from the drug prohibition profits. He says, well, there's no prohibition in these treaties. Maybe the third one, you can't traffic. Well, what does that mean? It means this guy who's standing on the mountains of in the Andes in Bolivia, he can pluck the cocoa leaf off the tree and chew it. It's not against the law to consume it, but he can't hand it to his brother and let him chew it. Does it make any sense at all? None. The fact of the matter is that it's the money that drives the drug business. It's the money that tempts the kid to quit school, join a gang, get a gun, shoot each other, fighting over who's going to control the drug business. I have heard, oh, I'm sorry. I have heard in talking to people here that there's a difference between the violence that's happening in Mexico because of the drug cartel business, and that really relatively few people are being killed with that compared to the retail drug business in Mexico. And rather than try and draw a distinction there, what is really the underpinning of both of those problems? This kid who I'm talking about in Chicago, 90% of the high school kids in some schools dropping out to go into the drug business because they see that that's the way to get ahead. This United Nations Al Capone prohibition paradigm is the reason that kid is tempted to do the wrong thing. It is that reason that these people form these cartels to import these drugs. Al Capone was in favor of the prohibition of liquor. Why? It was the foundation for the business. Pablo Escobar, Colombia, was in favor of the prohibition of drugs. Why? Because it was the foundation of his business. The Tijuana cartel, the Gulf cartel, the Zetias, the La Familia, the Medellin, you name the cartel, every single one of them is in favor of prohibition. They don't want to get caught, but the prohibition is the foundation for the business. And it's all about money. So the gangs in Chicago, the gangs in whatever town, Monterey, that is selling these drugs, it's because of the money that they can make. So if you talk about the grand scale cartels or you talk about the local street gangs, it's the same economic rule. It's the leg on the stool that he won't talk about. It's the whole operative of this thing. I'll bet you wonder what my program would have looked like. Me too. You know, we don't want to say anything drugogenic here. We're not in favor of drug use. But here's Big Al, and this is Pablo Escobar, America's longest war. Actually, it's the world's longest war. We put these treaties in place in, what, 1961, and then 81, then 88. One is worse than the next. But the trouble with the drug war is it doesn't work. And here's Chicago's evidence. This is a snow fort of cocaine engulfing the city. I like the way it engulfs Chicago because that's exactly what it's done, a Chicago cocaine snow fort. Then if that's not enough, here's a 40,000-pound seizure. My house is littered with so many paper clippings and books about seizures, my wife wished I would get rid of them. And large drug seizures are not evidence of drug war success. That the Mexican government succeeded in getting this 15 tons means nothing. It's evidence not of success of the drug war effort, but of the failure. The bigger the seizure, the bigger the evidence of the failure, because if there wasn't a failure that produced the 15 tons, you couldn't have seized them. So in Chicago, we have 75 tons of seizure for one thing or another. When when you seize drugs by the ton and you prosecute them by the gram, it shouldn't take a lot of figuring to figure out that that's not a good idea. But anyway, that's what we do. And I mean, I could click through this thing forever. I thought, well, I could put together a slideshow and show you people hanging from ropes, pictures of people with their heads cut off, pictures of the burning of the drugs. But you've already seen it and know so much about it. It's just one story after another, piles and piles. And then what do we do with this successful thing? We seize all these drugs. What do? We burn them. What does that do? It has the effect of putting exclusive control back into the hands of the drug dealers and the drug cartels. If you were the head of a drug cartel and they just seized 15 tons of your methamphetamines, what would you like them to do? You would like them to destroy it, because now the only place you can go back to get your drugs is back to the cartels. So that basically law enforcement, the United Nations, these international efforts to stomp out drugs are really supportive of the interests of the drug cartels. So America here, some newspaper says it's over, the war is over. I wish we could send that to the United Nations. It's for you. The drug war puts stronger drugs, uncontrolled, unregulated, everywhere. It is simply the best policy to put more drugs everywhere. And we've proved it year after year. And why doesn't the drug war work? Because it's the money, honey. And here back in 1992, front page of the Chicago Sun-Times, $7 billion addiction, the drug trade in Chicago. Estimated 20,000 workers, 400,000 customers, 70% of the people in jail are there on narcotics offenses. In federal prisons in the United States, some 63% roughly are there for drug offenses. In state prison systems, it's like in the 20 percentiles. Here, now that we used to say, if you don't trust banks, put your money under the bed, under the mattress. This is this drug dealer's mattress. Can you imagine trying to put that money under the bed? I mean, it makes the thing as comical as the drug war and drug policy of the world is. And then we try any and every strategy you can think of. So what are we going to do about the drug business? And here's a whole list. I can't go through them all because of the time, but we've tried everything. What is the one thing not on the list? It's the fourth leg on the stool he won't talk about. It's the economics of drug prohibition that takes something that grows on a plant and makes it the most valuable commodity on the face of the earth. The magic of prohibition combined and superimposed on human nature, which has an addictive quality, and secondly, which has a weakness of greed. I had a client in the private practice of law who I made a millionaire because he was the victim of sex abuse as a child. He's now a millionaire. He comes back a year later and says that he's been arrested for selling cocaine. I said, why in the world would you sell cocaine? You got all the money you need. He said, because it's exciting. I got the kid out of it. He's now a stockbroker, a commodities broker in Chicago. Anyway, I had another client. He owned a forklift business. He's in his 50s. He comes to me. He said, Jim, I should have come to you, but I was embarrassed. I said, well, about what? He said, well, I got arrested for selling cocaine to my friends in a bar, and I'm going to the penitentiary for 4 years. So he's losing his house, losing his business. He can't support his daughter, can't support the disabled vet that he took care of. And I said, why would you do that? You're in the 50s. And he said, the government gave me an opportunity to make money, and I took him up on it. The war on drugs. Public enemy number one is the war on drugs. Public enemy number one is the war on drugs. You want to make society better, you want to make Mexico better, you want to make the world better, then end the war on drugs. What is the war on drugs? The war on drugs is prohibition. It's intolerance. We used to teach kids tolerance is a good idea. With this crazy drug war, we've taught them Intolerance is the new regime. Zero tolerance. Just say no. Kids shouldn't use drugs. Adults shouldn't use drugs. But they should decide not to use the drugs. Not because government is going to mandate and tell them they can't use it. One of the rules that judges are taught, right, Jim? He said, what's the rule, Jim? The rule is you don't make an order that you can't enforce. You don't make a rule you can't enforce. When you say you can't have marijuana, it's unenforceable. You might as well outlaw clouds, outlaw dandelions. The dandelion companies that kill the weeds each spring, you know, I mean, you can't stop it. It's just part of life. Passing a treaty will not make the drugs go away. The message I would ask, Antonio, that you take to the United Nations is that the people of the world are recognizing that drug prohibition and the war on drugs is the heart of the crises that are facing the world everywhere. That people everywhere are waking up and they're no longer going to support it, tolerate it, and if necessary, they're going to withdraw from the treaties and do whatever else is necessary to bring that to the attention of the leaders. You received a petition from Avaz, which is a worldwide group on the internet where people can go, and some 600,000 people signed a petition calling on the Secretary General to recognize it's time to end the war on drugs, just as it's almost time for me to stop talking. Now, if I had more time, I would tell you that everything in drug policy works in reverse. If you think you got a good idea in drug policy, don't do it. You think the idea is good to keep the price high so that nobody can make money and that, so the drug cartels can't make money and people can't afford the drugs? The more you succeed and the higher the price, the greater the supply, the greater the consumption, and the worse the harm. That's not the page I'm on, but it's a good page. The weakness of treatment, it's easier to make a new addict than cure an old one, but treatment is better than law enforcement. Now, part two, if I had time, the point I would make is not only does the war on drugs not work, but it is the heart of nearly any crisis you can name in America or the world. The problem with guns, gangs, crime, prisons, taxes, deficits, AIDS, health care, trade imbalance, bullet holes and uninsured drug dealers, the corruption of the kids, the corruption of the police, the corruption of institutions, the funding of terrorism, the destruction of the golden rule. You name it, thank the war on drugs, thanks the United Nations paradigm. Now, the next slides just go through all of those things, but I want to make one other point instead, because I don't have time to go through them all, but you can read about them in today's newspaper. Why does a policy that fails so mightily, why has it been in place since 1961, since the century, we're talking about prohibition really, but since Nixon's declaration of war in 1971, why is it in place? The bad guys are in favor of the war on drugs, but so are the good guys. The police, Clinton says we have so much crime we have to hire 100,000 more policemen. But we do have a lot of crime because of prohibition. And so then we build prisons because we catch some of them. And so now we build so many prisons we don't have money for education. So now we need money for drug treatment, but it's going for radar balloons in the Caribbean. We have people who need clean needles, but they can't get them because it'll send the wrong message of drug tolerance, of compassion, of understanding. Don't want to teach those things. So we've got people who are hired to work in the courts. We've got more judges, more parole officers, probation officers, prosecutors, public defenders. Somebody's got the drug testing contract. Somebody's got the laboratory contract. We got to transport the people back and forth. Somebody's got the clothing contract. Everybody's got a contract. I got a friend, he's a correctional officer. Are you in favor of the war on drugs? He answers, it's job protection. The municipality next door to the one I live in has virtually no crime, but they put up a new $4 million police department. Where did they get the money? No taxes, no bonds, drug money. They forfeited the money. Half the money goes to the local government, half goes to the feds. So we have drug war policing. We have policing for profit. So that it's in the economic interest of that mayor next door, right to where I live. And the trustees, are they in favor of the drug war? Well, yes. We did this. We pay the police officer's salary. We pay for the squad cars and the munitions with the money that comes in. The newspapers in the United States get $400 million a year in anti-drug advertising money. Is the newspaper in favor of that revenue that's coming in? They are. The good guys and the bad guys are both riding the drug war gravy train, both in favor of it. Nobody is on the other side of the line of scrimmage. I hope after today, the people of the world, the people of Mexico, are on the other side of that line of scrimmage and will demand an end to the war on drugs. Thank you. Well, let's see. I have one question here. It says, yesterday Mark Kleinman suggested that prohibition was okay and could solve the problem if we focused the strategy. What are my thoughts? Well, my thoughts are that as much as I like Mark, the one thing which he constantly overlooks when he makes a presentation about drugs is the economic consequences of it. It's prohibition that he leaves in place, with the exception of for marijuana. He's come around and said that, well, we should legalize marijuana. But on all of the other substances, he still ignores the economic consequences of prohibition. So I think he's mistaken when he thinks that just focusing, and why he would think we haven't focused for the last century. I don't know why he thinks we can focus better now. Then one person asked, well, really isn't the problem that we need to morally develop people? Well, I agree with that. I'm the chairman of a church council. I believe in morals, and I believe in faith, and of everybody's faith. But the most fundamental principle of any faith that matters anywhere in the world is that you care about other people, and that you try and put in place policies that don't hurt people, that encourage people to care about one another instead of sacrificing someone else to protect yourself. The underlying principle, as far as I'm concerned, of all religions worthwhile are that one person cares about another. And this drug war obviously is the antithesis of that. Well, and I've got one more question here. I should read it myself first. I'm going to pass this and read this and think about it.